What's up, what's up, what's up? This your man, the STL Stranger, Umar Lee, host of the St. Louis Speaks Podcast. You know what it is. I'm here with the very popular podcaster, writer, author, force of nature in St. Louis, Miss Sarah Kendzior.
Hi.
So, I was trying to log in my producer Mark Lore's account to do this another way and to get a little modernity to this podcast, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So Mark is going to be upset with me that I'm doing it old school and I'm doing it the regular way, but you got to do what you got to do. And, I cannot leave St. Louis without interviewing Sarah Kendzior, who just interviewed me for her podcast.
Everybody has a podcast, Gaslit Nation. So listen to that and you can hear Umar. Then you can listen to me here.
Yeah, Gaslit Nation and St. Louis Speaks. This is like when Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson did, what was it?
Ebony and no, was that that?
Say.
Say, right.
Say. You know,
I'm thinking Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, who was Ebony and Ivory?
Is it Stevie Wonder?
Is that Stevie Wonder?
I don't know. Can you edit this retrospectively, or is it just going to be us trying to remember like early 80s duets?
I mean, the 80s was a great era, man.
It was
a great era.
It was.
I plan to, the thing is I'm broke, but if I had money, I would buy parachute pants. Like the old polyester ones.
I would pay to see you wear the parachute pants,
yeah.
So maybe I can fund this operation.
Because, like I always wanted them, and I couldn't get them. And if my hair grew, it grows, but it kind of grows funny.
I think you'd have a sort of like ZZ Top meets Hammer thing going on at the moment.
I would like a Huey Lewis, mullet. Like a Huey Lewis style mullet. I mean, Huey Lewis was the man. I mean, Huey Lewis was a cool dude.
I'm glad you got that on tape.
I
just want that as my ringtone, is Umar Lee saying Huey Lewis is a man. Power of love. It's a curious thing.
Yeah, the power of love.
One man weep.
Yeah. Hey, man, the heart of rock and roll is still beating, so.
Don't need no credit card riding this train.
But I think, that, look, I told this, and my man John Costello at Mocha Bees, he was upset about this, but I had to say it, that John Lennon was the poor man's Phil Collins.
Yeah, I don't like John Lennon. I don't like the Beatles.
Yeah, see, I said this and people gave me shit.
They hate. I talked about it on my podcast. We got more hate mail over that, over me saying I did. And it wasn't even like I said they suck. I just said they don't do anything for me on a personal level.
I said if you put a pistol to my head and asked me to name 4 or 5 Beatles songs, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like I know they put out an album called like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts.
That's one of the songs.
I know John Lennon had
Imagine
all the people. I know they had
but I hate that song.
Yesterday. I know those songs, but, my dad did not listen to the Beatles. I did not grow up in a house where he listened to the Beatles. He did have an old Beatles 45 with an Apple, and I remember that, but he didn't listen to the Beatles. I don't remember people listening to the Beatles.
I'll tell you that.
I knew they were hugely popular. I just didn't know their songs.
No,
and people say you're lying. How can you even watch movies?
People get really offended when you say that. That's what I found out. And I'm saying, it's fine with me if you like them. It's just on an emotional level, it does absolutely nothing for me. Like, I don't feel anything.
Just to troll them, I'll say this. Fuck the Beatles, okay?
Yeah, fuck the Beatles.
Yeah.
This is when both our podcasts get canceled. There's people unsubscribing as we speak.
So that's what it is, and all praise of Phil Collins, And
Huey Lewis. This is the same music that American Psycho listens to. You're literally naming all the bands in that book that the serial killer liked.
Well,
if you bring in Whitney Houston, you got like the trifecta of that novel.
Whitney Houston was also the crush of Osama bin Laden. Did you know that? Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So Osama bin Laden was very distraught about the situation with Bobby Brown. I mean, this is all documented in the when they got the documents. And bin Laden was, he was trying to pursue a path where he could possibly romance Whitney Houston to take her out.
That wouldn't have worked out for a number of reasons. But...
Well, it would have blew up. It would have blew up.
She was a closeted lesbian, right? There's new documentary.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. She couldn't come out because she was, her people, her representatives and her family were either homophobic or worried about her popularity. So yeah, it would have been very disappointing for Osama bin Laden had he pursued that path.
He also had $1 million worth of weed in his compound.
Wow.
They think he was selling it, but because I said, unless there was, $100,000.
And porn, too, which they've never said what kind of porn it is.
And I said the weed he was selling because if he was smoking $1 million worth of weed, he would have had $100,000 worth of Red Hot Riplets. And they would have...
This is really a high level. Everyone's gonna be like, "This is who you brought on the show." And this is terrible. You know what this is? This is interview 2 because we just had the big serious conversation, and now we've lost all our professionalism.
We were very serious and wonkish on Gaslit
Nation. This is it. This is the actual conversation that Umar and I have.
But I didn't use any bad words.
How many cartons of Red Hot Riplets would Osama bin Laden buy if he was stoned?
So here's the thing. Let's get to the serious matters at hand.
Yeah.
I'm in St. Louis. Unfortunately, funeral of Bassem. I did an episode on it already. Sarah, you also know. What was your memories of Bassem?
Bassem was somebody I became friends with after I interviewed him several times during Ferguson, but we stayed friends after. And, he was known, rightly so, as this very fierce fighter, as somebody who was, confrontational, who spoke his mind, who spoke truth to power. He was also an extremely sweet, friendly guy. I think he genuinely wanted to help others. He was always looking out for the most vulnerable people. At one point, when my family had fallen on very hard economic times, my husband was unemployed or underemployed, I should say, for well over a year. We had trouble paying our bills. A lot of people, when you're in a situation like that, people who are kind of friends with you for the wrong reason, because they think you're popular or they think you're, going places in life, they'll walk away from you. Bassem was always somebody who looked out for us. He was always asking me, like, are you okay? How are your kids? How are your husband? When we would hang out and talk, he was just a sweet, nice, good-hearted person. Like, I think he had just such a kind soul. I think he was very sincere about his passion for justice in St. Louis, in Palestine. I think he led a very, very stressful life because he fought so hard for those causes. And, I'm extremely sad he's gone, and my condolences to his family.
Fully agree. Now we're here in 2018, December, and it'll be 2019 soon. It'll be the last year of the teens. I guess the roaring 20s will come back again. Mm-hmm. It's so odd. What did we call the zeros? The 2000s?
The knots, I've heard people say. Yeah. It's like...
And what do we call this decade? The teens?
Just hell. Fucking hell.
But I mean, like, people don't call...
No, I don't know. The 2010s? I don't know. I'm sure there's some...
The 2010s or something?
It's going to be looked back as an extremely dark era. It's going to be looked like,
I don't
the 1930s.
But the 20s, we can officially use like that decade again.
We can use that again.
Yeah, we can use it again.
That's the roaring. It's not going to be... It's going to be like the whispering 20s, like it ends with a
Could be the roaring 20s again, but it could be roaring with weaponry.
Yeah,
but here's the thing. We're here in the United States of America. Donald Trump is president. We just had midterm elections. And, I really think these were, I don't think we saw a blue wave. I think we saw a net gains for Democrats, definitely. And like in the state of Texas, Beto didn't win. But a lot of Democrats did. Clean sweep of Harris County races. Colin Alger wins Congress. Democrats won a lot of elections in Texas. And things are looking very positive for Texas Democrats. And Democrats did well in a lot of states. So I think it's a very positive election for Democrats, if not, the total blue wave, which would have been similar to the 1994 Republican Revolution, Newt Gingrich. But we're getting ready, and I'm not even going to talk about this on this podcast because I'm not ready for the shit show, the Board of Alderman race in St. Louis. But the presidential election is starting. Mm-hmm. And within the next few months, 3 to 6 months, we're going to start getting the candidacies. There are up to 50 Democrats that have expressed interest in running. 5-0. Mm-hmm. Including my candidate of choice at the moment, the golden boy, Oscar De La Hoya.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
The natural forerunner there.
Yeah. The natural front runner. We had some guy like on TV, like some congressman I never fucking heard of from West Virginia get up and say he's going to run.
All right, then.
So, but there's
I know that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not going to win.
There's a list of like 50.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's say half of them don't run. You still got 25.
Right.
Are Are you feeling upbeat about this race, or do you think it's just going to be a disaster?
I'm not upbeat, and it doesn't even have to do with the candidates per se. It has to do with the changes in the voting system that have happened in the last 8 years. Basically, Citizens United, the partial repeal of the VRA, the new voter ID laws, just blatant efforts by the Republican Party to disenfranchise people, to suppress the vote, particularly for immigrants, particularly for Black communities, Native American communities. You're also seeing things like Republicans just refusing to concede or trying to rewrite the rules, like in Wisconsin, trying to throw out Democratic wins, trying to disempower them. And so, the GOP wants a one-party state. Trump wants a one-party state. There's a lot of kleptocracy. There's a lot of money running through the system, a lot of dark money. They don't want that to be jeopardized in any way. And so I think they'll go to any lengths possible to consolidate that rule. And so before you even get to a candidate, like, you could have the best candidate ever, and it doesn't matter if people don't have the opportunity to vote for them, and if voting is, gerrymandered or rigged or interfered with in such a way that the voice of the people isn't able to be heard.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
And in terms of individuals, I have this strange old-fashioned thing where I actually want to see their positions. I want to know their platform. I think we're in for a total shit show in 2019. I think we're in for probably war. I think we're probably going to have a recession brought on in part by the retail crisis, but also by all of, Trump's horrible policies, these trade deals that he's been putting in. I think we're in for more hate crimes, more violence. Every single person that runs is going to have to deal with a whole new set of tragedies and terrible circumstances that are different than the ones that they've dealt with so far. And they're going to have to be people that can really think on their feet, that can rise to the occasion, that can talk to a broad audience, that can handle just an endless series of crises. And so I want to see those folks in action. I want to see the debates. I don't want a cult of personality. I think it's much better if we have a rigorous set of debates between different people with different views. So I really don't like this sort of glomming on to one person early. I want to see what everybody has to say.
You have to forgive me. We're sitting in the car, and
and you're a wuss.
And I'm a wuss. I'm cold as fuck. And I had to turn the car on because I'm cold. Sarah, this sounded very biblical. In the end, there'll be wars and rumors of war.
Yeah.
It sounded much like the Book of Revelation, behold, ride on the pale horse type of deal. But I really think that I'm talking to a lot of people all over the country, friends of mine, and there seems to be this pessimism that it's not about American political cycles, that it's not about normal presidential politics, normal American politics, and even, like you can say Trump accelerated it, but there are many other factors, not just Trump, that the American project seems to be coming apart. That just the glue that holds us together. And there's such a division in the country that's unsustainable, and there's such much vitriol and violence between parties that there's a real sense. When I talk to people, they're saying, I don't know in 10, 20, 30 years if we'll have the country that we have today. They're talking about physically, geographically.
Oh, sure.
They're saying that this country may fall apart. Do you feel like that too? Or?
I worry that that's an outcome. Not so much, I think, because the majority of people want that, because I really don't think they do, but because people in power, people who have that kind of leverage, might want that for their own advantage. We have a government that's beholden, an administration that's beholden to a lot of foreign governments, for whom it would be beneficial if the U.S. were to fragment into, separate countries, for California to leave, for Texas to leave, for economic powerhouses to leave, and for that to affect the global political body. But I do feel like there is, incredible tension. I think people feel like there's opportunity hoarding. Their expectations have changed. They feel ripped off. They feel like the things they've worked hard on for, the things that they've relied on, have gone away. I think all of this is exacerbated by social media, both just rumor mongering, hate speech, propaganda, the gutting of local news and the replacement of it with conspiracy theories. Like, it adds up to a very unstable environment. I think we're in a really uniquely unstable time. We're still dealing with the fallout of two massive wars, one of which was fought on false pretenses, with the Great Recession, which, contrary to popular belief, never ended. It was a restructuring of the economy that disadvantaged almost everybody, and with social media and the changes that social media brings. And that makes it hard to predict the future. It makes it hard to even envision the future. And I think when you're in that position position when you're just trying to see a year ahead and you just see sort of a void, that's a very frightening position to be in. And people I know from all walks of life are kind of in that. They don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. They don't know if their job will be there. They don't know if their president will be there. Maybe he won't be. That would be great. They don't know in the end whether their country will be there. And so while I don't see imminent collapse, I think this is more something that may happen over time. I think that we're closer to the brink than we have been, certainly in my lifetime, and probably within, since the Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, I just get that feeling. I mean, friends of mine are pursuing job opportunities in the UK and in the Middle East, and just there's a general pessimism setting in. But even for young people, look at my daughter, 9 years old. She's growing up. Her president is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump at school, she's at a school that, her class it's a very diverse school, suburbs of Dallas, but it's the largest group would be Hispanic kids, Mexican American kids, and Donald Trump seemed like this super villain in school.
Yeah, no, same with my daughter's school, which is I think about 90% black. And so I'm glad she's at that school because we don't have to pretend. We don't have to pretend to like him. In the hallway where there was once a picture of Obama, they did not replace it with a picture of Donald Trump. And I'm grateful that they're addressing the fear and the worry that people have.
My daughter's saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the Texas flag in the morning.
Of course she is. Yeah, she's in Texas. That's what my nephew does too.
Yeah. And fuck Texas. Every chance I get to shit on Texas, I do.
Fuck the Beatles and fuck Texas.
Fuck the Beatles and fuck Texas.
You're going to lose all your subscribers.
The worst thing would be a Beatles concert in Texas. I can't think of anything worse. So I've thought about running for office in Texas on the platform of banning the Texas flag.
Yeah, you're just going to get killed. That would be the great irony of your life, is that you spend your whole life in St. Louis, the murder capital of America, and then go down in Texas. That'll be it.
I was at the mosque after Basim's funeral, and I told Imam Jalali Qasim, I said, no matter what happens, I have to be buried in Missouri.
I was thinking, because of course I keep thinking now about everybody that was involved in Ferguson, after Basim, and I was like, having this, I shouldn't even say this on your show. I was like, first of all, I was devastated something happened to you, but I was like, what would Umar want? I'm like, he'd want like Provel sprinkled, on his grave.
Well, I say when I die, I want Provel, I want Vest soda.
There's gonna be people coming up with riplets,
red hot
crumbling
riplets,
them over the tomb.
I want Cardinals jerseys. Trying to say I want a, St. Louis style. That's what I want. I mean, I want the traditional, the very simple, brief, religious funeral, very simple, very brief. But then my friends can celebrate in St. Louis style. And actually at Basim's funeral, his dad, Zudi, told me to get out of St. Louis because so many Ferguson protesters are dying. St. Louis is the type of city, when I come to St. Louis, relatives tell me, don't come.
Yeah.
Stay out. Because they're worried about your personal safety. That we've had so many homicides in the family, and there's been so many deaths of Ferguson protesters that, just as there's a sense of pessimism nationally, here in St. Louis, there's a sense of pessimism.
I think it's a sense of realism. I mean, I think people see things as they are here, and that's why folks who are from here tend to sort of call things ahead of when they happen, because it starts here and it spreads out. We were the leaders once in St. Louis. Like, we were innovators. We were a city that people would flock to. We invented rock music. We invented blues. We invented ice cream. We invented all these things.
Hot dog.
Now we invent, racial strife and segregation and despair and the collapse of economic institutions and the collapse of the suburbs and, fringe movements and all sorts of things.
We had the first Tea Party rally in St. Louis. Or the height of the housing crisis, the opiate epidemic, STDs, murder.
We're the center.
And anything bad, we're leading it. Trying to say. And so
Eric Greitens.
Right. Trying to say. I mean, so what we have is people that it's not necessarily pessimism. It's just, man, shit is fucked up. We're coming up in this fucked up reality. We're surrounded by this fucked up reality. Maybe I need to stick a fucking needle in my arm and get high. Maybe I need to drink some lean just to get through the day. Trying to say there's that sense in St. Louis. But we were once the leaders. We were once the business, one of the leading business centers of America. We were once an economic powerhouse, a cultural powerhouse, a sports powerhouse. And so there's a sense here that all good things are in the rear view mirror. And there's a sense in Dallas that they've never had it better.
Yeah.
And that they're, the fourth biggest metro in the country, and they'll surpass Chicago in 15, 20 years, and just it's booming economically. So they're very positive and upbeat in Dallas-Fort Worth area, and very kind of gloomy here in St. Louis. But you can't really blame people, At the funeral, people told me to leave as soon as I can, And so, man, I can't knock people when they say that, because this is the reality that we've all faced here in St. Louis, state of Missouri. And
it's a frustrating thing, because it's not like people here are any less skilled, less talented, less creative. I think we're actually more creative than they are in a prosperous city, whether a coastal elite city or a city like Dallas that's, on the up. We just don't have the same opportunities. We don't have the same infrastructure. We don't have the same institutions. And I think we've now, this is something that's also changed a lot in the last couple of decades, have this sense that if you're going to be taken seriously, if you're legitimate, in an intellectual or political or creative field, you have to leave. You have to go to LA, you got to go to New York, you got to go to DC, you got to show that you're serious. And you show you're serious by leaving a place like St. Louis behind. But the types of people who can afford to do that are rich people. They're people who have inherited wealth. They're people who can, work unpaid jobs or low paid jobs in a very expensive area. And so, I think a lot of the frustration from here is that, there is so much potential. There's so much mismanagement, and there's such a lack of, what do we all do with ourselves? What do we all do with our lives, when we're living here?
And you got these problems in St. Louis, and you got to outstate that dominates Missouri politics. You got Governor Parson, okay?
I'm good.
The guy that could not navigate a single St. Louis neighborhood without GPS. You got
now we have Josh Hawley, who's now under investigation as well.
Roy Blunt, Donald Trump, Ann Wagner, Lazy Clay. These are the people that are in charge of dealing with the problems of St. Louis City and St. Louis County.
Lida.
Lida. And this is a general sense that these people either A, don't give a fuck about the problems, B, are part of the problems, or C, are just kind of lackadaisical in the sense of Clay. Just, it's not that
he's not actively malicious.
He's not actively malicious. He's just not really motivated to get off.
Well, it's a giant task. And I think that just the way this area is organized, all these tiny municipalities, who do you actually turn to when there's a problem? Who do you actually go to for help? I think many people are not even aware of that. And so, there's a sense of why would I run for office? What would my jurisdiction be? What would my role be? Who would my constituents be? It's such a mess.
But I'm sitting here at WashU with Sarah Kendzior. I mean, it's actually a very pretty view we have right now of change. To me, it is the changing leaves, different colors. You have the brick. You don't have these kind of beautiful homes in Texas.
True.
You don't have this kind of change of season. Hanukkah is upon us, and and we got Chabad right here to my right up here, and WashU. I mean, these kids are, I got to feel they're positive, upbeat, but most of these kids at WashU are, they're on the winning side of the economy.
I taught there, and I went there for my PhD, and it's a mix. It's they don't have the same concerns that any normal person does, because they're breathing this rarefied air. But within that very elite circle, they were also worried. They were worried about finding jobs. They were worried about achievement. They were worried about these kind of external markers of success that I think most of us don't really give a shit about, because we know that we're never going to be entering that realm anyway. But for them, it caused a lot of pressure. I didn't think of it as an upbeat place. I saw it as a very kind of competitive, very stressed out student body. Of course, I met some very nice students who were trying to do good things for the world, same with faculty. But, overall, I don't know. But one thing that was always emphasized to us as WashU students was don't leave the campus. It was always sort of St. Louis is this giant hellhole, and you need to stay on the hill or you're going to die.
That's the thing about WashU. I mean, if you go to Philly, you got Temple and Penn. They're very much part of the city.
Right.
If you go to D.C., GW is very much part of the district. WashU's kind of like American University in D.C. It just exists in its own thing.
Or Georgetown, without the guest speakers.
But it's generally kind of part of the Georgetown neighborhood.
Right.
But in Georgetown, it's not really part.
Right, that's what I mean.
Right. But WashU is just like
they were purposefully like that.
Right.
And I think it's changed since Ferguson because they realized how obnoxious it was and how racist it sounded. You know, like, don't you dare venture out into the dangerous world of the loop. I mean, and this was, 10 years ago when crime was lower, honestly, was safer. But that was just it. It was sort of the sense of like, there's nothing worthwhile to see in this place. You're only here to go to WashU. And for me, that was very different because I had 2 children, while I was getting my PhD. So my community was not WashU. My community was my neighbors. It was other moms with kids my age. It was, friends that I made. And so, St. Louis felt much more like home to me. And that's one of the reasons I never left. I didn't want to leave. But it was crazy to see the portrayal, how WashU portrayed St. Louis versus what St. Louis and especially U City was actually like in reality on a day-to-day level.
I mean, if you have a lecture come here, a world-renowned lecture, if you have a forum, that should be advertised to the whole community.
It should be. I never know what's going on, and I'm an alum.
Everyone can come and benefit. They're like, fuck you, we're doing our thing. That's it. So that is what it is. Like, I've made a lot of money off WashU kids over there in taxis and
I know,
stuff
I
like
made
that.
a lot of money off WashU, so I shouldn't be complaining either. But you need to edit all this out, honestly, or you and I are in trouble.
Unfortunately, I don't know how to edit. So
that's good.
So just straight shot. So
just kidding. WashU, go.
Yeah,
what
go.
Are they, the Bears?
Go
Bears.
Go Bears. Go Bears. One of the great pictures of me and my friend Talal has got the I Love WashU shirt on there. That's the day I got fired from my job. But, I think one of the things I like about what you're writing and exposing to a international audience is, that St. Louis, we're on the front lines of both political and social movements, but of problems.
Yeah.
And, as much as some guy on MSNBC like Joe Scarborough talk about flyover country, people are not really looking at flyover country.
No, they're not. And he had me on to literally talk about my book over flyover country. I don't think he knew, and that I use that term somewhat, ironically, like to sort of turn it on its head. But I don't think he read it or knew what was in there. And I brought up on the show, I was in the New York studio and it was him and Mika. And I said something about, one of the big problems in life is that people who aren't particularly talented or intelligent land in these very powerful positions due to nepotism or their political connections. And then they set the whole agenda for the country. And I'm just sort of like looking at them, and then Mika gives me this look where she catches on, and she's like, "Okay, I guess that's all we have today." And then I sort of thought, well, that was very subtle of me. That could have really been about anything. That could have been about the themes in the book, because those themes are in the book. But
for our younger people,
but people noticed, and then they wrote articles about it. So I don't think I'm going to be invited back on there.
Our younger listeners, Mika is the daughter of
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
I'm glad you pronounced the first name because I didn't know.
He worked for the Carter administration, is that right?
Carter
Secretary of State, I think, or National Security. I can't remember. Big shot.
National Security.
Big political guy, professor. She's American political royalty.
What was going on with Brzezinski and Kissinger in the 70s? What was going on?
I got all sorts of thoughts on what was going on in the 70s. And have you noticed that the same shady people from the Nixon era are in the Trump administration, and that this basically seems like 40 straight years of scheming? Like you had Roy Cohn.
Well, if you look at his platform was Pat Buchanan's.
It was Pat Buchanan's, and they were both in the Reform Party in 2000, so that sort of
Pat
makes
Buchanan
sense.
worked in the Nixon administration.
Yeah, but you got Roy Cohn was Trump's mentor. Roy Cohn also worked for Joe McCarthy, who was a mobster lawyer, and he was Nixon's, advisor. And from that came Roger Stone, who worked for Nixon, and from Roger Stone came Paul Manafort, Lee Atwater, these shady Republican operatives who worked for dictators and oligarchs all around the world, Dimitri Simmons, and all these kind of think tanks in Washington that were very pro-Putin, that roped in a lot of Republicans. And, what seemed like a conflict in terms of Trump and Russia and his, various foreign ties, seems like something that was really built up over time. And Kissinger, of course, because he has to be involved in every shady thing in American politics, seems to be involved in this as well. But it really kind of amazes me that, it feels like history is like vomiting up everything at us. It's like every day there's a name, like Giuliani has to re-enter the picture. Like every Republican asshole of the last 40 years is wrapped up in this Trump crime, which is really something considering he was supposed to be the renegade outsider. That was always a myth. He ran for president, or almost ran 5 times, including 2016. So yeah, I would love a really comprehensive look at the 1970s and Nixon and the, all and stuff like Iran-Contra, all these unresolved crises and controversies of the past that seem to, set the stage for the current disaster. I would love somebody to do a really comprehensive look at that.
And remind you, in 2014 in Ferguson, which we talked about in Gaslit Nation, your podcast, I predicted a Nixon-like figure to rise and run for president.
You were very wise.
Yeah, in 2016. And, it's kind of odd that we had this figure. I didn't see this being Donald Trump, and so many ties between Trump and Nixon in those two movements. So, what's old is new again. That's why we study history.
Yep.
People don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. And this is a great example of people not studying history and being doomed to repeat it, because we've had a steady decline for working class and poor Americans over the last number of decades. A lot of those things began with Nixon rolling back the Great Society.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get Carter, but then Reagan takes on the unions and takes on many of working class America's agenda. So George, I've been ignoring this George Bush funeral coverage because look, I'm not a, I don't, like they say, don't let the dead rest. So I'm not.
Right. That's how
I'm not going to trash him. I was not a fan when he was alive, and of course, in comparison to Trump, even his son looks good. In terms of, but what is his lasting legacy that we see today, George Herbert Walker Bush?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because it is Trump, I think, that's making him seem good by comparison. One thing, George H.W. Bush was a disappointment because you would see him deviate from the party line. For example, he raised taxes when it was necessary. He left the NRA when they became extremist. He voted for Hillary Clinton instead of Donald Trump. But in many other ways, he would endorse the worst elements of his party and he would go along with it. He would, he recently supported Brett Kavanaugh. That's what his last tweet was about. And he did stuff like he put Dan Quayle in as the vice president. And it reminds me of John McCain picking Sarah Palin, where they might not be the person that you disrespect or the extremist in the room, but they're enabling extremists. They're enabling corruption.
Putting their red meat to the base.
Yeah, they put their red meat out with them, and then also, there was a lot of corruption under George Bush as the head of the CIA, as the vice president under Reagan,
and all the energy, the oil, the tight relations with the Saudis,
yes,
etc. So it's a complex history. He voted against the Civil Rights Act in '64. So it's a complex.
He was a complex guy. He's interesting because he was an institutionalist. He was somebody who really wanted strong American institutions and was president at a time when institutions worldwide were collapsing and changing. I mean, mostly for the better. You had the collapse of the Soviet Union. You had liberation movements in places like South Africa. He relatively peacefully ended conflicts in Central America, although again you're going to find a lot of corruption if you look into his record on that. And I mean, it could have been a much worse time. It could have been an extremely violent and frightening time. And so he did, let a certain kind of steadfast presence in that respect. But I don't know. I often wonder what would have happened had he won in '92. Like, would there have been the Newt Gingrich, Republican Revolution that came out to challenge Clinton? What would a relationship with the former Soviet Union have been like? All this kind of thing. But I remember, I was young when Clinton ran for office. I was, in middle school, and it was just, George Bush. He just seemed like this absolute loser. Clinton seems comparatively cool. As
Ice Cube said, Ice Cube said, a bird in the hand is worth more than the bush. But because Clinton, 92, Arsenio Hall playing the saxophone.
Yeah.
He was seen as
cool. He felt our pain. He ate McDonald's. We ate McDonald's. George Bush didn't know how to use a supermarket.
Went on MTV.
George Bush vomited on people. He vomited on the president of Japan or something like that.
I don't remember that.
I remember Saturday Night Live.
I don't remember.
I mean,
I remember Dana Carvey with the wouldn't be prudent, not at this juncture in time. I remember those.
I mean, I was like a 13-year-old girl. Obviously, I was not going to be like gunning for George Bush as like, the president over Clinton and, over all I had known as
how old were you in 96?
In 96, I was 17.
Okay, so you could have been a White House intern in 97.
When all that was going on, that's what I was thinking, is Monica's not that much. She's like your age, right? You guys are like the same age?
Yeah, we're like the same age. I want her to run for office.
I like her.
I want to run for office.
I like her a lot. I think she went through hell, and I think that she's done really good things talking about what she went through and talking about bullying and cyberbullying and challenging political power. And she's very likable and she's very smart. And
I'm listening to the Slow Burn podcast now, which is a really good podcast. First season was Watergate. second seasons, like Clinton scandals and stuff like that. I'm all for Monica Lewinsky running for office.
That's not a bad idea.
I think
I think she would never do it because she's seen the system up close, and why would she want to be a part of that?
I think in the Me Too era, okay, that, you know, she's looked at differently.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And Bill Clinton is looked at differently.
Yes, that's definitely
true.
Trying
to say, I mean, if Trump, although no one would be surprised, well, let's just say Obama, where people would be surprised, had interns giving him oil gratification in the Oval Office, this would be a taboo.
Yeah.
This would be a scandal. And, you know, and it would be looked at differently nowadays. And people would be a lot more, because people in the 90s basically said Monica's a hoe.
Yeah, or that she should be flattered. And honestly, that was
Yeah.
during a time in my life, you know, as a teenager, where I always had old men hitting on me. And when I would complain about it or think it was inappropriate, it was like, oh, you should be flattered. You should be glad they're paying attention to you. Or, you know, you should treasure this time in your life when you're, like, young and hot. And I was just like, fuck this. Like, I just want to do my work. I just want to live my life. Like, get these assholes out of the picture. So I just remember we were on the podcast.
Well, I was told by Ryan Frank. He said, you're in your 40s, stop talking about hot chicks, right? Because I was talking about Instagram models.
Depends how old the hot chicks are, honestly.
I was talking about Instagram.
If you're talking about, like, 18-year-old, that is gross.
Right,
you should stop it.
So I was talking about Instagram models that I thought was hot. You know, like, that's one of the discussions that men have with each other now about Instagram models. Oh, did you see this account? Did you see that account? Whatever. And he said, you should stop talking about that because you're too old. So I still like women. He said, yeah.
You could get some, middle-aged or geriatric Instagram models.
He said, we all do. He said, we all do, but don't talk about it on your podcast, right? And I said, okay. So I still like him. I can't talk about it. But so I'm listening to NPR the other day, KWMU, that St. Louis in the Air show, and here's Don Marsh, who's like my grandpa's age.
He's not talking about Instagram models, is he?
Him and his whole panel were ogling over how hot the young woman chess players were.
Oh my God, Don Marsh?
Yeah, and these were like college chicks.
He's like the nicest guy.
Yeah, they were like,
he's not who I think of as like a big lech.
They were like, oh, certainly easy on the eye.
Ew.
Oh, and I said, okay, and then they kept going on, like, we certainly want them good-looking gals. You know what I'm saying?
Are you sure it was
Man,
Don Marsh?
You look it up.
At the chess championships?
Yeah,
was he just like really bored?
It was it was like a panel. Like
how does that happen?
It was like three old dudes.
Oh man!
And they were talking about how hot.
That this is how St. Louis dies. Is we have like the International Chess Hall of Fame, very prestigious, very serious, and of course we get like our top radio host making lechy Instagram model level comments about the chess players. That is how we as a city. That's how we roll.
That's crazy. I mean, it's like that old man. Look at that fatty.
Oh man! He interviewed me live in person, and now I'm feeling weird about it.
He didn't say that. He was like, "What a honey on that baby."
Oh God! Oh God! No!
But
it's just wrong.
It's just wrong. It's so wrong.
Yeah.
It's so wrong.
I gotta process this.
So yeah, but we have a lot of things going on in St. Louis. So you're very excited to ride a loop trolley. Me and Mark rode the loop trolley last week.
If it shows up, I still believe it exists. I feel like it's the Godot of trolleys. Like, I'm just going to wait. And, I saw your video, but I feel like it's like doctored footage. We live in the era of fake news. I think the loop trolley is fake news.
Loop trolley and soccer will save St. Louis.
Oh, God. Yeah. I got to say, I just want to say this because I'm in U City, that I really am pissed about the loop trolley. I'm pissed about it's just so wasteful, and there's so many other things that we need. And I also am not a fan of the development that they're trying to do on Olive, where they may get rid of some of the really good restaurants, restaurants run by immigrants in strip malls on Olive Boulevard, and put in like a Costco or something.
In my old shitty apartment complex.
And Umar's old shitty apartment complex, which should be, a historic landmark, UNESCO style. Umar Lee once lived here. But, there's a lot of good places. I like the Simba Ugandan restaurant in particular. But, it's part of U City.
Chinatown, St. Louis Chinatown.
St. Louis Chinatown. And
which already, the original one got torn down downtown to build the original Busch Stadium.
This is just a terrible legacy. Like, you could have a Costco anywhere. It's not like we're lacking in empty space in St. Louis. And U City, is one of the better better places to live here. I think it has a lot of character. I think it's got a lot of interesting things going on. So like, why are you trying to take away our interesting things for these horrible development products that they don't help people? You know, my kids go to a Title I school. If you're going to invest in something, like go invest in that. Go invest in transportation. Like, don't invest in these big box or nostalgia projects that really don't exist for the masses. So that's my St. Louis Speaks soliloquy.
So in closing, Sarah Kendzior,
yes,
this year is ending, 2018. I would say, I don't know. Has it been a good year? Let the historians debate.
It's not been a good year.
Yeah. What will be the big political story out of 2019? Nationally, okay, we're going to give you 3-tier question. International, national, and St. Louis.
Okay, well, internationally, I'm worried that we're going to go to war with Iran. There's a lot of signs that both the U.S. and Israel, and possibly in collaboration with Russia in a sort of trade-off deal for Russia taking Ukraine, are going to have war in Iran, and more broadly, a sort of restructuring of the Middle East. We see a restructuring of international alliances with Trump cozying up to dictators blatantly, with them committing, brazen acts of murder, and the weakening of Western institutions in response, and also a spread of white supremacist movements throughout the West, and in general, a lot of chaos. I think the old world order is disintegrating. We're all going to bear the fallout of that. Domestically, I am looking at the Mueller probe, not as some sort of savior thing, because I think our problems are a lot more deep-rooted than that and are not going to be solved by one man, but I am interested in the results of very obvious acts of corruption. You have Trump already confessing to obstruction of justice, committing high crimes and misdemeanors, committing violations of the emoluments clause. There's a million reasons why this guy should be impeached. We finally have the Democrats in the House. I don't know at this point whether that's enough to really mean anything. I think if Trump leaves the White House, it's going to be in handcuffs while he's kicking and screaming. I think if he senses he's going to go down, he's going to take the whole world down with him, which kind of contributes to this sense of impending war. And then St. Louis, I guess we have our own impending war in the alderman race, and I've been reading everybody's subtweets and vaguely worded Facebook posts. I know that that's a contentious race. I'm in U City, so I'm not going to be voting in that election, but of course what happens in St. Louis City affects everybody in the region, so I'm looking to see, how that develops.
All right, well, I'll briefly give mine, and then we'll shut it down. Internationally, I think that, the big story would be Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is kind of the linchpin between whether there will be confrontation with Iran or not. I think either Mohammed bin Sultan will stay in power and solidify his power. And, I know a lot of people talking about Khashoggi and stuff like that. There's a lot more people being killed than Khashoggi. Mm-hmm. Salman al-Wade is on death row now.
Tortured.
Yeah, Sheikh Nimr was killed last year. A lot of people are killed by the Saudis. And it's kind of complex because I do like the fact that he's loosened the religious, the conservatism in Saudi Arabia. I would like to see a peaceful revolution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. So I'm not opposed to a ending of hostility between Saudi Arabia and Israel. I think it would be a net positive for the region. But to replace those things with some like a one-man autocratic, violent rule, which is solely based on personal enrichment and corruption, is not it's not a net positive. So it's very complex. So the question for me is, will Mohammed bin Sultan continue to consolidate his power, which will probably result in the confrontation with Iran, or will the other elements of the royal family launch a coup against Mohammed bin Sultan? Because there's already a lot of discontent with him in Saudi from the religious establishment and the more religious elements of the society. We'll see. Nationally, the big story, I think, the Mueller indictment, whatever happens with that, obviously is going to be the big story. It's going to set up 2020. However it goes down, I don't have a prediction. I'm not following it all that closely. I rely on Sarah to follow that, trying to say it's just too much, And in St. Louis, I agree. The board of alderman president race is going to be a shit show. It's going to be nasty. It's going to be unpleasant. But it will be the big story of 2020, barring any horrific crime wave, which is very possible in St. Louis. Well, Sarah Kendzior, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This is the STS Ranger, Umar Lee. And if we leave you with nothing, fuck the Beatles. Peace.